author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello, welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special edition, we are talking the Mamdani Split, Hakeem Jeffries gets the jitters, Hunter Biden unleashes, and discovering why Democrats still seem so lost. Please remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And you're on Liberty Nation Radio. I'm Mark Angelides, and we're joining a conversation with Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Tim, as a New Yorker yourself, what's your take on the recent, let's call it Mamdani mania?
Yes, that'd be a good term for it. There's a couple ways to look at the Mamdani phenomenon. I mean, first of all, for a guy who was at about 1% support a month or two before the election or the primary in New York, he did a remarkable job of engendering support among young New Yorkers. And I might say that I think part of the reason he was able to do that is because, you know, Gen Z, as it goes up to about 30 years old, supposedly, these people have never had to live through socialism. They've never had to feel the impact of what socialism does to an economy, to a people. They're not aware, nor do they care, that literally tens, if not hundreds of millions of people over the last half century or more, really century, have died at the hands of socialism. So to them, it means that he's addressing what concerns them the most, which is the cost of living, accessibility to housing, and a general sense that, you know, they can live and thrive in New York. Now, of course, it's all empty promises. Actually, it's worse than empty, because there's no possible way he can fulfill all the things that he has promoted, such as free bus service, free child care. And let's not forget, too, he is planning to eliminate bonuses for bankers and Wall Street executives, which is a huge part of what they ordinarily make in a year. So this stuff is unsustainable. But what Mamdani has done more than anything else is put the Democrats in an impossible position. And you can see that from the fact that the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate Minority Leader, I should say, Chuck Schumer, the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, the Governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, nor anybody outside the squad has been willing to endorse this guy. If you think about it, it's pretty incredible. This is the most high-profile race of this off year, this political off year, the year after a presidential election.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Sorry, Karen.
I mean, so the fact that the national Democratic leaders and the governor of Mamdani's own state will not endorse him tells you a great deal. He is a major problem for the Democratic Party. But for young New Yorkers, he seems like a panacea. He'll solve all of their problems like socialists always claim they'll be able to do, but never can.
I want to make a distinction here, Tim, because young New Yorkers absolutely are all for this newfangled socialism they've been hearing about on TikTok. But there was a recent, I think it was CBS polling, forgive me if I got that wrong, but it showed that 18 to 30-year-olds, Donald Trump had support pushing like 55% not long after inauguration, and that he's dropped massively with that group. And you have a lot of people on the political left cheering this, saying, you see how bad Donald Trump's gone, his right-wing rhetoric, all this, it's pushed them away. And I don't think that they understand. Now, New York is a very different Because I don't think they realize that the young people that are turning away, at least in opinion polls, from Donald Trump, who were supportive of him before, are not. What's the best way to say this? Are turning away because they don't think he's going far enough. They're actually an incredibly right-wing demographic, and I think that is a mistake that the left is really making, that it's going to come back and bite them in the behind, because they're not turning away from Donald Trump because he's doing what he said he was going to do when they supported him. They're turning away because he's not doing as much as they'd hoped he would do. And that, to me, seems to be... I mean, you tell me, have I got the analysis wrong here? And I'm not talking about New Yorkers here, by the way.
Well, Mark, you kind of have to divide Gen Z into two different groups, the younger Gen Zers and the older Gen Zers. It's interesting that there is a divide. The younger Gen Zers, those in their upper teens and early 20s, were heavily supportive of Donald Trump in the 2024 election. But if you look at the older Gen Zers, who are 25 to 30, they are more liberal, as you would generally expect young people to be. I think Democrats are working off the assumption that when you're young, you tend to be more liberal. And when you're older, you tend to be more conservative. I remember it was your own Winston Churchill who said, anyone who's young and conservative has no heart, and anyone who's old and liberal has no mind.
Yeah.
And so, but I think that, New York youngsters respond to social media. Their lives sort of center around social media. And I have to say, Mamdani has done a brilliant job of appealing to them through a social media platform and telling them what they want to hear. And what he's done is what the Democrats have not been able to do for the last 4 years, which is talk directly about kitchen table issues, about the cost of living, about the cost of food, about accessibility to housing. The Democrats have been busy talking about climate change and systemic racism and DEI and transgenders. These things are not important to the American people. What's important is that they can afford to live. And so Mamdani found a way to appeal to those young New Yorkers. They just don't realize they're being sold a pig in a poke. And I will say that, there'd be about 3 or 4 times as many people that voted in the general election in New York City in November than voted in the primary. So New Yorkers still have a chance to, to really understand and dig down on what would be involved in having essentially a Marxist as the mayor of New York and the world headquarters of capitalism.
It's quite fascinating. It's the follow Zohran Mamdani's way of managing your finances by, as he said himself, he gets money off his parents when he runs out of funds, which is essentially, I believe, his blueprint for Big Daddy federal government.
Well, his father is a very well compensated left-wing quasi-Marxist professor at Columbia University. So it all makes kind of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, his mother's a filmmaker as well. Quite a well-known one within certain circles too. We'll be back with Tim Donner, continuing our talk on Zohran Mamdani and the New York City race in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Tim Donner. Earlier in the show, we were talking about the Mamdani mania, what's been happening with Zohran Mamdani. What I want to talk about now, Tim, is move this slightly further afield from the man himself into what his party, the Democratic Party, think about him. And as you pointed out, Senate Minority Leader Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, New York State Governor Kathy Hochul have endorsed him for the contest this coming November. And I read recently that Hakeem Jeffries thinks that if Mamdani wins in New York, it could impact negatively the chances of Democrats reclaiming the House.
You think?
Yeah.
I mean,
So, well, he certainly does. And this, for once, I agree with him.
because he is, he is the most prominent Democrat in the nation right now.
Yep.
All the attention is focused on him. There's Virginia and New Jersey governor's races, but there's relatively little attention on those compared to New York City because everybody's waiting to see, number one, if Mamdani can win, and number two, if he does, how huge the exodus will be out of New York from businesses and wealthy individuals who really form the bulk of the tax base in New York, which means those people leave and there's nobody to tax to pay for all your socialist schemes. So, it's clearly something that has caused major problems for the Democrats. They don't know what to do. They don't want to endorse him. They don't want to not endorse him. But with the major Democratic leaders refusing to endorse him, he's left with Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Dianne Presley, and the most radical left-wing quasi-Marxist Democrats, and they're the ones who are endorsing him. So what does that say to the country? They're saying, well, I guess this is where the party is right now. The party has gone, if possible, even further to the left since the 2024 election, which didn't seem possible, Mark. I mean, politics 101, you look at what you were and why you lost, and you change those things. You don't double down on them, but it seems that Democrats have no idea what to do here.
That might be the issue, that they still don't realize why they lost.
Or they refuse to come to grips with it. They're doing a so-called, a postmortem on their, stinging defeats that they suffered in November. But they're still talking about, well, we didn't message effectively, or even that, they're whispering that Joe Biden should have gotten out of the race sooner. But the point is, even beyond Joe Biden, is that they have supported a left-wing ideology that is not only unpopular, but mysterious to the American people. The average person in flyover country is wondering, why this emphasis on DEI? Why aren't we talking about men who choose to become women? Why are we focused? And why do Democrats continue to support the idea of men participating in women's sports? This is what their national image is. So no matter what happens to Trump, and certainly his popularity has gone down because it has to, once you actually do the things that are as bold as he is, you're going to step on a lot of toes. But still, I mean, even if Trump is at 45% approval, the Democrats are down in the 20s or low 30s at best. So like many elections, the population basically might look at the 2026 midterms as which is the lesser of two evils, at worst for Trump.
There's a couple of interesting points of information here. So generic ballot polling for 2026, I believe that the congressional Democrats are about 2 points ahead of the Republicans at the moment. Now, if you juxtapose that to just before the 2020.
And of course, that's on the so-called generic ballot,
sure,
without any names attached to them, but yes, just a Democratic candidate or a Republican candidate. Right.
But that's 2 points ahead, roughly, compared to where the GOP was 3 points ahead heading into the 2024 presidential election. The House really just squeaked by with a majority. And then you've got this other thing, this other aspect, and that's two polls came out in these recent weeks, like last week or two. One from CNN, which said that Democrats are the least popular they've been going back to when CNN started the polling in 1992. They're down to 28%, which is it's their worst performance really then in the last 30 something years. And then there was another piece of polling that came out, and this was from a Democrat super PAC. And the majority of voters, including obviously Democrats, described the Democratic Party as, and I'm quoting here, woke, weak, and out of touch. And
other than that,
they're great. They're having no.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you enjoy the play?
So you've got these two supposedly these two things that look kind of contradictory, but I don't think they actually are. So you've got the lowest approval rating in the last 30 plus years, and you've got them being described as weak, woke, and out of touch. But then at the same time, they've got a +2 lead in the congressional ballot. And I think what that is because, and I might have this wrong, but I think this is because people are optimistic that the Democratic Party will turn itself around from where it is now in the lead up to the midterm. So they're very optimistic about it. In fact, that's played out in another poll, which I think is a Quinnipiac poll, if I'm saying that correctly, where Democrat voters are more enthused to vote in the midterms than the Republicans by, I think it's a good 10 points difference there.
Well, midterm elections tend to be grievance elections.
Yeah.
If you think about where the average Trump supporter and the average Democrat are now, Trump supporters are sitting fat and happy. They're in the catbird seat. They're seeing their guy rip through the Washington bureaucracy and make earth-shattering changes on so many different fronts. Whereas the Democrats are watching this happening and they have steam coming out of their ears. Well, for midterm elections, it's the people that have steam coming out of their ears that tend to show up, which is why the enthusiasm is going to be higher among Democrats. It's their first shot at sending a message to Donald Trump that they don't approve. So strictly speaking, this is why midterms almost always, it's about 85% of the time, pushing towards 90%, where the out party, the party that does not hold the White House, picks up seats in the midterms because they've got 2 years worth of a track record of a president they hate to vote against. And they bring along some people who voted for their president on the principles, but then when they see it in practice, they're not quite as happy. And a good example of that is the rounding up of criminal illegal aliens. The population was hugely in favor of that during the election without perhaps thinking through what it would take to achieve that. And now that Trump is sending ICE in to do whatever it takes to get rid of these criminal aliens, well, they're not quite as happy with the pictures they see of this happening. So these are usual, typical trends that happen in midterm elections.
We'll see how that carries on. Now, we're going to be back with Tim Donnan after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I'm Mark Angelides, and we're continuing a conversation with Liberty Nation senior political analyst Tim Donner. Tim, it kind of escaped your attention this last week that a certain Mr. Hunter Biden took to the airwaves I'm not entirely sure how to describe it, but it seemed to me that he was trying to resuscitate the legacy of his father, President Joe Biden. But what came out of that was, I think it was more telling than Hunter Biden would have thought. What's your take?
Well, it's hard to imagine anything that could have thrown more gasoline on the Biden fire than Hunter Biden, engaging in a profanity-laced tirade against all of the people who used to be allies of his father. Sure, he called Trump a dictator and all this stuff, but that's to be expected. But what he did to rip a new one for all the major Democrats, including, going all the way back to, highly respected figures like um, James Carville from the 1990s. Um, and, and what he did was he trashed the entire party. He pulled a Greta Thunberg basically on his party. He said, "How dare you do what you did to my father? He was a loyal public servant for 52 years, and you treat him like dirt. If you had simply let him run his course, he would have won the election just like he did in 2020. Well, I mean, it's one of the most delusional and bitterest rants I've seen in the, I don't even want to say how many years I've been following politics, but let's say it's multiple decades. I've never seen anything like this. And if you had to pick something to make the Biden situation even worse, if that was possible, on top of all of the former Biden aides who were taking the fifth, refusing to answer that they may incriminate themselves about covering up about Joe Biden's obvious and growing incapacity in his use of the auto pen, it would be this, where he's just, I mean, the word unhinged is overused, but if you looked it up in the dictionary, you would see Hunter Biden's face next to it. And he seems to have forgotten, how disgraced he was with the absolutely debilitatingly embarrassing revelations on his laptop, all the shady dealings and the influence peddling overseas. And then he has the audacity to go on to these podcasts, which, by the way, nobody's ever heard of, because the main podcasts, the major podcasts don't want him anymore. He's irrelevant. And he's furious that he's irrelevant, that his father's been trashed. But he refuses to accept the idea that if his father had stayed in the race, Donald Trump, instead of winning, was it 31 states or 32, Trump might easily have won 40, because people can see when someone is incapable of doing his job. And they could see that clearly with Joe Biden. So, I mean, this is just humiliating for the likes of Jeffries and Schumer and the other major Democrats, who are trying to put together something for the midterms. And between the Mamdani situation in New York, where they don't know what to do about this radical Marxist who's supposed to become mayor of New York, on top of this, now they have to deal with the Hunter Biden fallout. I mean, Mark, he used the F word or the S word supposedly like 112 times during these podcasts. I mean, it beggars belief.
Yeah, it really didn't do any good for Joe Biden's legacy.
No,
Hunter Biden, he uses the profanities because he lacks a vocabulary, even though Joe Biden says he's the smartest guy that I know.
Right.
But you get this point. I think for me, the big part was he was talking about Joe Biden as a person with no agency. And this is the last thing you want for the president of the United States, is somebody who doesn't have agency over themselves. He was saying, and I've actually got the quote here. He said, and I'll skip the profanity. I said, "I know exactly what happened in that debate. He flew around the world. Basically, the mileage he could have flown around the world 3 times. He's 81 years old. He's tired. They gave him Ambien to be able to sleep. He gets up on the stage and he looks like a deer in the headlights." End quote. There was so much to unwrap in that. So first, they gave him Ambien. So Joe Biden didn't take the Ambien. They gave it to him. This is somebody who can't control what medication is being given to him. This is not, he's not going off and buying it from a back alley dealer like Hunter, although you never know. But so he's been given the Ambien, allegedly, after flying around the world so much. 3 times he could have flown around the world. Bear in mind, he'd been back stateside from that European trip for 2 weeks and had spent, I think it was almost a week at Camp David in the run,
Yes.
preparing for it. So what? They didn't let him sleep while they were preparing for him? Is he the Manchurian candidate? Or they sleep deprived and drugged him to get ready? Why?
Well, they tried
kind of thing. If he'd been resting in Camp David for several days ahead,
they tried to drag information out of congressional committee. Tried to drag information from witnesses who were taking the fifth and doing everything they could to avoid saying anything to make things worse regarding the whole Joe Biden situation and whether he was in charge or not. They couldn't drag a single thing out of them. And now Hunter Biden goes on a couple of podcasts and offers up information that nobody was even looking for, new information that makes the whole thing look even worse, which is that they were force-feeding, presumably sort of force-feeding the president of the United States a very powerful sleep aid. And we're supposed to think that this is a legitimate excuse for his performance. And you're awfully right, too, to say he'd been around the world 3 times. He had been back, as you say, for some time. And if a president cannot handle taking a trip or 2 trips or 3 trips overseas and can't recover from that in a week to where he gets on the stage and says, we finally beat Medicare, which is the most unhinged single statement, I think, ever made by a presidential candidate, not to mention a president, a sitting president, then, there's it defies any sense of composure to just unleash yourself, knowing if you're smart at all, Hunter Biden had to have realized that this would make him even more toxic. And he's not going to be admitted to any event hosted by Democrats for the remainder of his life. He's become a pathetic figure who's been sent to the corner with a dunce cap on. And it seems he's going to have to sit there for the rest of his life. He's just made his fate even worse than it already was, which hardly seems possible.
there's another possibility there, which I'll get to. It's a little conspiratorial, but I do like these little rabbit holes to go down. But just before I do, I just want to throw one more thing out there. Ambien is a sedative. You're about to engage in the most important debate of your presidential career. They give you a sedative? That for what? I mean, it just beggars belief.
Well, first of all, who is they?
Yeah, that's
who is they that gave him?
Obama.
I mean, is this a conspiracy theory of who they is? Because now it's true, though, Mark. Yeah. People are saying, okay, who is they? Who decided to make the brilliant choice to give him something to make him more drowsy, right? Well, he couldn't sleep, so they gave it to him so he could sleep. But Ambien is known to have after effects.
Yeah.
Famously. So, but and think about this one. Hunter Biden said he was so exhausted, he couldn't sleep. How does that comport with reality? If you're exhausted, you would think that it would be relatively easy to sleep.
There's, to my mind, there's some kind of weird concoction of various drugs to bring him up, put him down, string him out, and set him right. And it's just all badly reacted. But aside from that, let's just wrap this whole thing into a nice little package with a little bow here. Hunter Biden is saying that he was out because Joe Biden was out because of that debate performance. It was only the left-leaning media and Joe Biden's fellow Democrats who were saying that he was absolutely fine except for the debate. Everybody else, nonpartisans, independents, Republicans, conservatives, everybody else could see that Joe Biden was having difficulty not just at the debate. It wasn't a single instance that derailed him. It was a continued decline at almost every public appearance or almost every staged, managed press conference with, pre-selected questions with little face cards and then answering questions that weren't even asked. This was not a single debate where he had an ambient and a bad reaction that secured Joe Biden's.
I mean, there's endless footage of him wandering aimlessly, going right when he's supposed to go left, saying A when he's supposed to say B. Yeah. I mean, wandering off into the woods, looking around. There's reports about how he would show up to an event in the Beast, the presidential limo, and he would just sit there for like 15 minutes, just staring off into the middle distance because he was so out of it. You might have seen that the footage of him stepping out of his limo at one point, and he stands there and he looks aimlessly to the left and the right and the left and the right. He had the clear look of, where am I? What am I doing? What am I supposed to do? Why am I here? I mean, it's unmistakable. So, this just makes the whole thing worse. The Hunter Biden thing makes a horrible situation even more unbearable. And you would have thought that Hunter would realize that. But of course, now he's probably going to say, well, he's standing up for the dignity of his family, when in fact, he just made things a whole lot worse, if that's even possible.
Let's not forget, Hunter Biden has a destructive personality, and he also has a blanket pardon for absolutely anything. He can set the world to fire, and
not now.
Not now. Sure.
Because, for example, because he's been pardoned for all possible crimes from the day of his pardon in December all the way back to 2014. But if he was, for example, called before a congressional committee now, and he lies or perjures himself and they can prove it, he's liable for that, because you cannot pardon someone for all crimes that may occur in the future, only ones that occurred in the past. But I think that Republicans they don't want to touch him. They want to let him keep spewing his bile and venom, mostly at his own party, because he's doing their bidding. That you couldn't pay for this kind of
or Tim
performance.
Or perhaps you could. We'll be back with Tim and Donna.
But fair point.
We'll be back with Tim after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. We're continuing our conversation with long-time host of this radio show, Tim Donner. So, Tim, just before the break, we were talking about how Hunter Biden appears to be torching the Democratic Party in some kind of parental loyalty, kamikaze sweep through the media. But it seems to me that the Democratic Party is probably doing a fair job of torching itself at the moment. Yeah. And they need to find a reason for people to elect them. And they don't seem to have that at the moment.
Clearly. They have, they've tried really to convince themselves that it was only because of Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. The messaging wasn't good.
Sorry, Tim. It's my theory here, and I might have this wrong, of course. It's my theory that their messaging was actually perfect for the message they wanted to send. It's just that the message people didn't like what they were saying. It's not that the messaging wasn't good. They had a great messaging machine.
But see, this is what they were.
This wasn't a good message.
They believe that, the Kamala Harris campaign ultimately didn't effectively convey the winning message that they had all along. So they're still in the stage, the 5 stages of grief. They're still largely in denial, and if they weren't, they would stop attacking Donald Trump irrationally. Attack him on policies you disagree with. But to take something like this strike in Iran against its nuclear facilities and try to minimize it and say, well, it only set it back a few months. Trump is lying by saying the whole thing is destroyed. That's exactly the kind of thing that got them in trouble to begin with. You cannot be a party that only stands against things. You have to be in favor of a couple of things here or there, other than
at least one
transgender rights and boys and girls sports and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those things don't count. Americans don't want that. They made it clear, but the Democrats refuse to get the message or refuse to consolidate the message. It's like, James Carville said it in his latest.
Hey. This is not James Carville. He's had a tough week with Hunter Biden saying, Jimmy Carville, he hasn't anything in 40 years.
But Carville said it right. And he should know, because he had a guy who did this in 1992 named Bill Clinton. He said, there needs to be a person that comes along and stands to redefine the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton took them from left-wing Michael Dukakis, who was a laughing stock, took them to the center with a message that appealed to blue-collar Americans, right? And, Biden couldn't do that. Kamala Harris couldn't do it. What Carville recognizes is that there has to be somebody, whether it's Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, or Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, or whether it's Gretchen Whitmer, the senator from Michigan, somebody who can take hold of the party and bring them towards the center. It's not going to happen institutionally, Mark, because institutionally they're so progressive. They're so baked into this left-wing vision of the country that it's not going to change institutionally. It's got to be an individual who drags them where they need to go.
Kicking and screaming, some might say.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, it's almost I'm reminded of 2015, 2016, because that's pretty much what happened to the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Donald Trump comes along, and he exposes them to their face. And anybody who's watched those debate performances, those primary debate performances, where he's calling out legacy after legacy and dragging through them
on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah. And he reshaped what it was to be a Republican voter. It seems to me that until the Democrats get somebody who is willing to shake up and burn their own party down and recreate it in their image, which may or may not be a good thing, then they're going to be stuck, as you said, they're stuck in the third stage of grief, the denial one. And anyway, Tim Donner, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Mark. Thanks.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to take a moment to thank our special guest for today, longtime host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. And of course, thank you, the listeners, for taking the time each and every week to tune in and join us on the show. Please do remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.